we're going to have to answer a central question as a nation. What, if anything, can we do to restore a sense of security for people who are willing to work hard and act responsibly in this country? Can we succeed as a country where a shrinking number of people do exceedingly well while a growing number struggle to get by? Or are we better off when everyone gets a fair shot and everyone does their fair share and everyone plays by the same rules? This is not just another run-of-the-mill political debate. I've said it's the defining issue of our time, and I believe it.
It's an exciting feeling, it's a nervous feeling, but it kind of feels like something's finally being done, like people are waking up.
This should be as inclusive a movement as possible.
When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, or when 4 black students sat down at a lunch counter in 1960, no one expected that 4 years later there'd be a comprehensive Civil Rights Act.
This is the proudest I've ever been to be an American in my life.
People around the country are aware that there's a problem with the disparity in power. The financial services industry is the locus of that problem. A lot of it has to do with corporate crime on the one hand, and on the other hand, the corruption of the government by people who have a lot of money and who have influenced politicians to look the other way.
When we read that the CEOs of multinationals are getting 500 times as much as the less well-paid employees in the same companies, does that mean the most junior employees are worth 0.25% of the most senior? There's no more powerful way of devaluing people.
We had the Arab Spring, we had the Spanish Acampadas, and we now have Occupy. The world's people are looking at a future that doesn't compute. Unless we fight and have a revolution in our lifetimes, there will be no future for us.
My name is Monique, and I live North Minneapolis. I love this community. I'm a part of this community. I grew up in this community. I graduated from North. Most of my friends live North Minneapolis, so I'm well affiliated with my community. I'm a single parent. When I bought this home, I bought it for myself and my 2 boys. My grandson doesn't live with me, but he's here pretty much all the time. He loves it. It would just devastate me if he couldn't come over here anymore. I worked for a nonprofit organization. I was a youth counselor, and we worked with kids that were transitioning back into the community. When I lost my job, I was just stunned. And the first thing I did was start looking for another job. And it has been, I didn't realize it was gonna be this hard. I have fallen 2 months behind my mortgage payment. A week later, I got a letter from US Bank saying that my house was going into foreclosure. I sat there for a minute trying to process it, and then I just started bawling. Freddie Mac would give me $3,000 if I left within 30 days. They would give me $2,000 if I left in 60 days. How could you even offer that You want to put me out. It's right around the holidays, you know. And I don't have anywhere to go. Me and my kids are probably going to be separated. And we're going to be homeless.
What was the big explanation for what happened in the crash? Oh, it was all these people who took out mortgages who shouldn't have taken out mortgages, and they didn't pay their bills, you know? If only people would pay their bills, then we wouldn't be in this problem. But nobody really buys that explanation anymore. Nobody forced these banks to go making these loans. They were making them as fast as they could humanly make them because they were making money. I talked to a guy, he would hang out in a 7-Eleven, and he would be like, are you happy in the house you're living in? Do you need a refi? I mean, he was looking for people next to the beer cooler to give mortgages to. And it wasn't the government pushing that guy to do that. He was doing that because he had a market for those mortgages. Goldman Sachs was going to buy it from him, and then Goldman was going to turn around and sell it to the state of New York as a AAA-rated security.
When I came into office, New York City's pension bill was $1.5 billion a year. Today, it's over $8 billion 10 years later.
A lot of these big banks targeted governments to sell them toxic and dangerous mortgage-backed securities, exotic swap deals that allowed politicians to push their debt into the future.
And that means pension costs have eaten up every single dollar of the savings that we managed to put together.
2008, 2009, 2010 arrives, and suddenly there are states all over the country that can't pay their pensions anymore. So what did these politicians do? They turned around and they blamed firemen and teachers and public pensioners and toll workers, and they basically said the problem that we have is that all these public sector unionized workers are bleeding us dry.
Hopefully, my children will see me next year. I'm a good teacher. I'm a dedicated teacher.
They actually were willing to blame some teacher who makes $45,000 a year for destroying the American economy, whereas the reality was these guys were ripped off.
These problems that all these people are talking about in all these different movements are not isolated from one another. You can't talk about the American housing market without talking about the national debt.
We are less than 6 days away from the date the Department of Treasury has signified would shut down the federal government and exhaust all borrowing authority. We all know that we are at this point because we have a fundamental difference in the principles on how our government should be run. We all know that we are at this point because the financial viability of our nation is at stake.
I heard about this New Yorkers Against Budget Cuts call for a General Assembly on August 2nd. I had gone to Bloombergville, which was an encampment that targeted the mayor of New York City and shed light on the fact that there are all of these cuts to social services. Myself and others who have been following what happened in the Arab Spring and in Europe wanted to have a General Assembly in New York. Adbusters made a call for September 17th via Facebook and Twitter to occupy Wall Street and flood Lower Manhattan with 20,000 people in tents.
People I talked to were telling me, well, you know, we'll all end up in jail that night and it'll be fun and, you know, that'll be it.
Most people thought that it would die out after a couple days.
We were trying to spark a meme that could shift the paradigm. If we want to do some sort of mighty turnaround of society so that kind of switches some sort of paradigm shifting moment, then you also need to spark epiphanies among people. So we call it culture jamming and meme war. You create a meme, something that people instantly, hook onto and understand, and then you deploy it and see if it can propagate and expand throughout society in general. Anonymous played a really important role in giving Occupy Wall Street an early huge boost. They created a video, I think it had like 70 or 80,000 views within a couple days.
Fellow citizens of the internet, we're Anonymous. On September 17th, Anonymous will flood into Lower Manhattan, set up tents, kitchens, peaceful barricades and occupy Wall Street for a few months. Once there, we shall incessantly repeat one simple demand and a plurality of voices. We want freedom. This is a non-violent protest. We do not encourage violence in any way. The abuse and corruption of corporations, banks and governments ends here. Join us. We're anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Wall Street. Expect us.
When I saw the video of Occupy Wall Street, September 17th, I was just like, oh, that's nice. You know, I figured it'd be like nothing really big. And I didn't really sign on then. And it wasn't until I saw this news report that said Anonymous has been ranked a national threat to security. And I was like, I'm there, I gotta support this.
When we started talking about Occupy, we thought it was very important that their message get heard. The corporate corruption and government corruption needs to stop. It has to stop. And Anonymous was very sympathetic to this.
Leading up to the 17th, we were very nervous, and I went to sort of see what the situation was on the ground, and it was very militarized. There's Homeland Security, there's NYPD, there's a counterterrorism task force. They totally barricaded the financial district. So we thought, this is probably not a good situation. It's probably going to be a bloodbath. And so we were expecting that going in.
So they became interested in creating a movement and in getting people all over the country and around the world and really around the city to do this kind of assembly.
This is an opportunity maybe for a new style, for a new shift in power and the way that people relate to each other. And, you know, like I say, I think we're fucked either way, but it's worth a shot.
I was waiting for this to happen. I knew it would happen because it happened in Europe, and I knew it would spread.
I really think it's time for young people to make the decisions. We haven't done a great job, so let them give it a try. And we'll support them.
Well, come on, we tried. We've been trying. I've been trying all my life.
I know, me too.
I went ahead and waited for the rest of the march to come up Broadway, and I was one of the 5 facilitators for that evening. At that moment, I think people really started to feel some sense of community in that space. You know, they were scared because of the militarized presence and the police presence in the financial district. But when they got to Zuccotti Park, they just felt like They could relax and they could have a conversation, and the dynamic shifted.
When I first got there, I heard a lot of artists, students, and activists talking, mostly young people, though there were a few older people. A lot of people who were involved in some kind of creative or political work of some sort.
There is a village that has emerged in Liberty Plaza.
A true community where people work together, not for money, but to survive. Everybody brought their outside skills from society.
We want to create a new form, a new society, and we're starting here.
We had different working groups to keep the community prospering. You had facilitation, and you had medic, media, you had kitchen, you had comfort, and direct action.
They're making decisions for themselves about what that's going to look like. That's an incredibly powerful statement.
People become more aware of themselves as not simply being used and exploited, but being part of a team. Their contribution being valued by other people, more of a sense of purpose, which is absolutely fundamental to human well-being.
These people are involved in this to change the world, and they're hopeful, and they want to see a better world for themselves and for their children.
People really do feel like that's their home. They feel invested in what happens there and what the future of Liberty Plaza will be.
It's very significant where we are. This is Zuccotti Park, renamed Liberty Square. On the other side is Wall Street. And here we are in this space that was only created because they wanted to build their towers beyond code and had to create a public space in their own quest for greed.
Jason Amati is responsible for the People's Mic. In a General Assembly, we have, hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people coming together, and it's really difficult to hear without amplified sound. And so we go, mic check, and then everyone else goes,
mic check! We are all part of this movement! Part of this movement! We amplify each other's voices! We amplify each other's voices!
The only way that you keep people involved in a movement like this is you have a process in which everyone's voice can be heard, right? A consensus process.
That drugs and alcohol are not allowed. Are not allowed.
Everyone needs to agree on a proposal for it to pass. We have hand signals, basically.
Jazz hands for...
I like what I hear.
This means,
I'm okay with it, but not really.
You agree on some things, but you're not entirely sure.
Point of order.
When someone is getting off topic, hey, you're making valid points, but this is not the time or place for that.
Louder means we can't hear you. Clarifying question.
I have a fact, not an opinion.
I
disagree.
The stack is the order in which people speak. So if you have something to say, you get on stack. And then eventually what you have to say will be heard, because you will be on a list that someone is very carefully keeping.
People come to a consensus meeting in the attitude of, I want to make a decision that everybody is comfortable with, as opposed to through a more authoritarian type of structure.
People that have been involved in communities that discouraged leadership, at least discouraged visible leadership, discouraged taking credit.
So lately we've seen a lot of resistance movements from Occupy to Anonymous organize collectively in ways that challenge top-down hierarchy. Sometimes people think, well, it's either got to be top-down with a leader or super loose and chaotic. With Occupy, you had all these working groups where people got together, they organized autonomously, and they worked as teams. And it's the same thing with Anonymous.
There's absolutely a thread of anti-authoritarianism within Anonymous. Anyone who stands up and says, I speak for Anonymous, will be quickly shut down as an idiot. And, Anonymous is, in a way, a hive mind. It's not about who I am as a person, it's about who is Anonymous and what are we about. And we think the message is more important than the people.
There's something in this decentralized model that seems to point toward another way. And the fact that these movements are all kind of taking up that model is really striking to me.
In conservative movements, one person gives the orders and everybody follows. And in this movement, there's a tremendous emphasis on giving everybody a voice But there's a downside to that, clearly. It's harder to have a coordinated movement.
I came down to Occupy Wall Street on the 4th day. I was trying to get involved, I was talking to people, and I was trying to figure out what my place was, how I could help. There were problems with the General Assembly's process, the consensus. People were impatient and would leave. I mean, the idea of a leaderless movement is, you know, kind of vague.
In every fair, just society, there are organizational hierarchies. And especially in a well-run movement, a well-run organization, there are still going to be organizational hierarchies.
It's messy and it's complicated and it's slow sometimes.
I know that it's 5:06 right now. We have a lot more stuff to get through.
But you have to be willing to take that on, making sure everyone feels represented and heard, which is the only way that we can actually change a system, I think.
You cannot give me a single example, not one, of an effective social justice movement that ever used the consensus process. In fact, the consensus process is suicide for social justice movements. There is a graveyard, I can share with you historically, of the end of social justice movements when they start to use the consensus process.
And I urge you to bring your ideas on fixing the process.
I think they just need to be who they are and cause this whole consciousness among the 99%. And that's a worthy goal all in itself, I think.
Seriously? The Occupy Wall Street protest.
From political talking points to smoking lots of joints.
I also asked them, how long are you going to be out here? And they told me, you know what? We're going to be out here as long as it takes to see change in this country. And I told them, you're going to be here a while.
Is it normal for the media to be perplexed and off-put with what they see in the social movement? If you could imagine them speaking with one voice would be saying, take me to your leader, take me to headquarters, show me your constitution, what are your demands, and so on. And anything that doesn't act that way, they're uncomprehending of it and tend to belittle it, if only because it's weird.
The first thing that started coming out was a kind of dismissal and ridicule. There was an early New York Times story that was basically treating this as a carnival.
It's going to be a huge flop. They're a bunch of losers. Look at what they're doing. This is the worst organizing method. It's that we did things so wrong is precisely why it worked.
It was already a tough situation for the reporters who showed up and tried to understand what the heck was going on and why these people were not leaving Zuccotti Park.
There was some initial confusion about what Occupy was. I mean, I myself kind of fell into that category when Occupy first started. This was about a lot more than just a couple of Wall Street companies misbehaving. This was a widespread movement that was about a whole lot of things that were wrong with American society. It took a while for, the media to respond to that.
It was just the kind of failure of the typical media method of approaching a people's movement.
I did such a great job.
There is no reporting, there's no chasing the story, there's no actual investigation, there's nothing. You just go, look, oh, okay, I see, let me write this down.
For some reason, the sound's reverberating off your sign. Can you lower it? Can you lower
No, because I'd rather not. I'm topless right now, and I would rather not be video tagged.
Let me go interview people that aren't really articulate. Let me go after a bad portrayal.
I want to replace capitalism with a more just economic model.
What do you want to replace capitalism with?
Don't say it, bro.
None of your business.
In a movement like this, the media is part of the terrain of the conflict. They're like the police. They're not your friends. They're not your enemies. They're a contingent that you have to either win over or fight.
Even before September 17th, we knew that the mainstream media may choose not to turn its cameras on us, may choose not to tell our story. We never pushed the press out. We just had to have a way to hold them accountable. And so what we would do is we would just have people film the interviews that they were filming.
I think it's time for maybe, I don't know, some participation in our democracy that isn't funded by news cameras and gentlemen such as yourself.
The OWS Media Group really emerged out of the needs of the occupation in its very early stages.
They had a couple of working groups who were tasked with producing all sorts of stuff that could be sent out over social media networks.
We flew people in from out of town to try to help with that process, people who had a lot of experience.
I came here from Spain.
have a TV channel, live stream channel online. We do a live streaming of all the assemblies and the marchings. So people that cannot be here, they can watch and see what we are doing and support us.
So without Twitter, Facebook, social media, and the live streams, the Ustreams, I don't think there would be a movement at all.
So many people have come to us in the park and said, I saw you on the live stream. I came here from Portland, Oregon, or I came here from San Antonio, Texas, or I came here from Madrid, Spain, and I'm just in awe.
The most important thing is that people get informed, they get the truth, and then make the decision for themselves what they feel is right and what they feel is wrong. I had a smartphone with a high-definition camera, and I thought I could film all this and upload it. But when I first got to the park, it was very difficult for me to get integrated in the system that they had created, the General Assembly and the process. And they also didn't have a unified idea of what they were trying to do. And I'm a very logical and organized person, so that kind of threw me for a loop. So I decided to live stream on my own without being a part of the official organization.
It's getting hard to breathe here. I'm being smashed by everyone around.
I realized if I record, it's difficult to upload the footage. I run the risk of losing the phone, getting the footage destroyed. But if I broadcast live, there's nothing that anyone can do. The footage will already be online within eyeshot of anybody who has access to the link, as opposed to one organization deciding what everyone should know. So I guess instead of having a pyramid of power where one person sits in the top and feeds it down, we'll have a trapezoid where several people feed down to everyone else, and then hopefully it'll eventually just become a straight line.
It's very exciting to sit there in your house with your cats watching this live stream and vicariously getting enjoyment, but it's also, that's not really what's going to start the revolution.
I heard really loud screaming, so I ran over there and took photos of two girls that got pepper sprayed. At the moment, we didn't know who did it. That night, when I got home, I realized I had a photo of him, his badge number right there. So I cropped it. In the blog post, I said, "You decide." And I woke up the next day and there was like 75,000 hits on my blog.
America became a police state after the passage of the Patriot Act. Its status as a police state is only solidifying. Occupy has been used as a demonstration of what can happen to you if you dare to challenge the stakeholders in this police state.
Anytime we see a cop peddling girls and then pepper spraying them, you can bet that Anonymous is going to dig in. With Anthony Bologna, we found out he had civil rights cases against him in the past. Within 10 minutes, we started tweeting his phone number, his email address, his information got made public.
People want to have their say, and this system isn't giving them their say, and so I just see trouble coming.
Then, about a week later, we were marching across the Brooklyn Bridge. I was in the very front, and I saw everything. Brooklyn Bridge March was one of the largest arrests in American history. 740 of us.
In the case of the Brooklyn Bridge, the police did not tell them they couldn't go there. They didn't block it. And then all of a sudden, the protesters found themselves encircled, trapped, and then arrested. We call that a mass trap and arrest, and it is found to be unconstitutional.
Then suddenly the frame was, something big going on here, and, well, these people may be a little screwy, but the police are over the top.
The message had started to sink in with the broader public, and the media could not ignore that. The New York Times editorial page very clearly stated that anyone who says that they don't know what the message is an idiot. This is a message about economic inequality in this country and the effect it has upon our political system.
It started to capture the public's imagination.
People are building assemblies in neighborhoods and in workplaces, and networks are being strengthened and formed around the country through road trips and conference calls and new websites and new social media platforms.
Throughout that week, we have this big, giant map of the country. We had different cities marked off. Like, there are now 13 cities around the nation that have occupations. And we're like, what? 13 cities? By the end of the week, there were 52 cities around the nation, and we were all just going crazy. By week 4, 900 cities around the world had their own occupations.
You're looking at the impacts that Occupy is trying to shine a light on. Mississippi's the perfect example of what's gone wrong. Being one of the most impoverished states with healthcare and with education, we are the last. I learned a lot getting my master's in public policy, but I have learned just as much within the last 2 months on what are our issues here and how can we address them. This is just the beginning. We're going to do so much together. It does seem like we've been fighting this fight, though, for years already.
It's a lot of poverty in Jackson. I don't really know how to break it down. South Jackson, West Jackson, there's poverty. Almost looks like Katrina. And people say, well, why don't they keep up their property and stuff? Well, if I'm poor, I can barely pay rent.
There are a lot of people that want to work and will do whatever they can find. They just can't find the jobs. Or if they can find a job, they can't afford the transportation to get there. You have people who get food stamps. They don't get enough for, balanced meals. Healthy food is expensive. We have older people, they've worked all their lives. They may have saved a little. They may have something. So they don't qualify for some of the programs that are out there. So it's almost like the system is set up where the ones who don't have anything can get some help. But the ones who are in the middle, it's really hard for them to get any help. Actually, the majority of our clients aren't homeless. There are people we call the working poor. The old saying, there's more month than money, is getting more true and more true every day. We have college kids last summer who got out of college, degrees, had worked hard, planned on this, couldn't find a job, and then they have loans to pay back. So it's even the ones who are trying hard or hitting that wall. They're hitting a ceiling, a wall, doors, they're hitting everything.
I come down here and eat breakfast, sometime lunch, and then I go to Salvation Army for supper. And I do that to minimize my bills so that I can do, like last Christmas, I had to make arrangements where I could save money to give my grandkids and my kids something. It's terrible. It's terrible. Mississippi is more of a country setting, except for when you go to the big cities, even the big cities aren't doing that good. If you look around this town, you'll see empty lots where they're real close to the businesses, and some of them are just empty lots that used to be houses, and the houses were old, and people don't have the money to fix them up, and they can't sell them because the economy's bad. Nobody want to buy no house and fix it up. Well, see, the rich, they guys have enough money, they can turn around and reinvest their money. The poor can't reinvest when they don't have nothing to reinvest.
America used to be one of the more equal societies. If you go back to the 1950s, 60s, its life expectancy was fairly good. But as it's become more unequal, you find life expectancy 4 or 5 years shorter than in the more equal countries like Japan, Sweden, Finland, Norway. The United States has a higher proportion of the population in prison, higher teenage birth rates, more drug abuse, more mental illness, more homicide. But its performance is very much what we'd expect given its level of income inequality.
We have gone from a society that had a level of inequality that was roughly comparable to other rich industrial democracies to being one of the most unequal countries in the world. And so the top 1%, the top 1/10 of 1% have experienced dramatic income gains over the last 30 years. Most Americans have not.
The more capable move up and the less capable, the vulnerable move down.
We've seen middle-class Americans rise by about a quarter in terms of their income after taxes and benefits adjusted for inflation, whereas the top 1%'s income has risen by about 10 times that, so around 250%. And what it means is that the top 1% has pulled away from the rest of the population. It's a story about the very rich pulling away from the rest of society, and it's one that is about very concentrated economic rewards at the very top of the economic ladder.
And that's an incredibly powerful and unhealthy situation. That's at the root of what Occupy is all about. It's not about greed. It's not about this person has money and I don't have money. It's about the sense of unfairness.
There seems to be more status competition, more status insecurity. We judge each other more by status. That drives consumerism.
Excuse me, are you going to the protest? No, I'm not.
The insecurity about status means that we are judging each other more by status and having to prove ourselves more in status terms.
Excuse me, sir, are you going to the protest?
The quality of community life weakens.
Are you going to the protest?
People trust each other less.
Are you going to the rally?
And there's less involvement in community life.
Are you guys going to the rally?
Social cohesion worsens in more unequal societies.
Are you guys going to the protest?
No.
Why not?
We make money.
The old intuition that's been around for hundreds of years that inequality is socially corrosive and divisive, basically what the data tells us is that intuition is true, truer than we'd ever expected.
The financial wizards of our new economy are really the super rich. And if you look at the top 400 taxpayers or the Fortune 400 list, it's hedge fund managers and high-level investors that are very well represented. Their average tax rate in the 1960s was probably around 40%. According to the IRS, in the mid-1990s, it was down to around 30%, and in 2007, it was around 16.5%. You know, once you recognize that government has played a really important role in allowing those at the top to reap these huge gains and put the rest of our economy at risk in the process, you start to recognize that this talk of class warfare is really a cover for class warfare by those who are benefiting from these trends at the expense of most Americans.
When Occupy first started, I talked to some people who were at the protests, and I said, well, what's your message? What's your basic complaint? And they were like, this is our message, 99% and 1%. At first, I didn't think that was serious. I thought they had to go farther than that in explaining what was going on. But it turned out that was a really important thing that they did, because it accurately reflects the situation.
Thank you for coming here and standing in solidarity with us all. Thank you for coming here and standing in solidarity with us all.
We started off with one march that I led from Washington Square, and they're going to do a march to Times Square. I was leading one march, and all of a sudden another march came in. So by this time, we have 2 marches on both sides of the street. It was freaking awesome. I'm leading the march, you know, and I'm crossing the street to coordinate with the other side, the other person leading the march, which was Mario.
We can't go up Broadway. What we got to do is stay on 6th until 47th Street.
Multiple times I was rushing across the street to find out what was going on.
They think they're going to try to tell us where to go. Yeah, there's all these little cells barricaded off. We can't.
And to coordinate with both sides. One time I crossed the street, had the right of way. I went to go back to my side, and the cop just grabbed me. I've been arrested 6 times. I've been beat, pepper sprayed, I get chased. I have no more tolerance for you and your badge. I respect the blood and I respect the flesh, but I do not respect that badge. And I'm tired of the language saying that, oh, it's just a few bad apples. Well, I've seen a lot of bad apples. I don't think it's just a few. I mean, people wake up.
The Occupy movement is the scream, the first moment in which people say, enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore.
And who do you come after for that money? Me! Who do you inconvenience? Me! With your illegal practices. We're fed up, we've had enough, and we're not going to take it anymore!
I got a letter from U.S. Bank saying that my house was going into foreclosure. I called U.S. Bank. It was really hard to communicate with them. You might get Sally one day. If the call got dropped, you call back, you might get Sue. They would lose the paperwork. They would call us back and say that they didn't receive something, or they wanted us to refax something because they didn't get it. It started taking a toll on me to the point where my stomach started hurting. I wasn't sleeping very well. It got cold, and I called the gas company to come out and light my furnace. The lady I spoke with at billing said that Century 21 called them on Monday and told them that they were going to be the realtors showing the house. And I said, how is that possible? You mean they could actually take my gas bill out of my name and put their name on? And she said, yes, because you're no longer the homeowner. If I was you, I would get my stuff out of there as soon as possible. It's not just about me, it's about other people, because there's a lot of people in this community that have lost their homes. We're the ones that are suffering. They're not suffering. They're not having to tighten up a notch in their belt and feed their kids and them going to bed hungry. Basically, they're getting richer, ripping people's communities apart.
I'll tell you what makes me the angriest is there's this group of people who has an enormous amount of political power who doesn't go to jail when they commit crimes. When the court rules against them and tells them they got to pay fines, they may pay it, they may not pay it, but they're not going to suffer any consequences for it. That's a very different experience from what everybody else in the country goes through. If we get caught committing a crime, we are going to go to jail, but that's not what these guys go through. We saw with this financial crisis, the biggest white-collar crime wave maybe in history. These guys stole not just billions, but probably trillions of dollars, and it was an organized fraud scheme. You know, you go out in the street here in New York, you'll see people selling fake Prada bags, fake Gucci watches, and those guys get arrested a lot. They do time in this country. The banks, they did the same thing. They went out and they sold mortgages that weren't what they said they were. There were millions of victims, and nobody went to jail. And there wasn't a single meaningful prosecution of any leading executive from any of these companies. On the other hand, if you go to any criminal court in this country, they're making 30 or 40 cases a month against people who maybe have a job that they didn't report to the welfare authorities, or maybe they have a car that they didn't tell somebody about. They're actually bringing those cases into court and putting these people in jail or taking their kids away. I mean, there are real consequences for that. And you compare that to these guys from Goldman Sachs who built a couple of Dutch and German banks out of $2 billion, and they don't even get charged. So when that happens it does two things. It totally demoralizes ordinary people because they feel like they can't win. And this other group of people becomes more and more aggrandized because they realize there's no consequences to their actions.
There's no question now that the deregulation of American finance went too far and too fast and created grave risks for the rest of Americans, which were realized in the 2007 financial collapse.
We've seen top-level fraud at HSBC, top-level fraud at Barclays, fraud manipulating the LIBOR, the interest rate in Britain. I mean, gigantic crime.
The only way to fix the system overall is to put real flood walls between the market and our democracy. We have to make it so that there isn't this tiny slice of Americans pulling farther and farther away from the rest of us.
The American dream has turned into a broken promise, that people work hard and go into debt now, that people are working poor. When George W. Bush told someone, you're working 3 jobs, that's great. No, it's not. You're supposed to work 1 job and get a decent paycheck for that 1 job. You're not supposed to work 80 hours a week where you can never see your children, where you can't engage in your own education, where you don't have a decent standard of living. I'm not here to work until I die. And I'm not going to be part of a generation that sees our standard of living decrease from our parents so that the rich can have their tax cuts, so that corporations can have low corporate tax rates. You know, it's like, hey, peasants, sacrifice your future so we can get rid of the deficits we created with wars and tax cuts for the rich. We're not buying it.
It's not going to be over until we get a real system in place that looks out for the needs of the people rather than the needs of the corporations. It's not going to be over until people are done talking about education, how they've gone to college on thousands of dollars in debt, and when they get out of school, they have no way of paying for it. People are not going to stop talking about this for years and years to come.
We are students!
We are students!
Not consumers!
Not consumers!
We are conscious of the privatization of public schools, and we are here today to make it all stop!
To make it all stop!
My name is Dory Simon. I'm 23 years old, and I recently graduated with my bachelor's degree. Right now, my loans total to about $59,000.
The amount of loans I have are roughly $56,000.
They tell you as soon as you graduate high school that you can take out all the loans you need to go to college. I'm $45,000 in debt, and I'm 20 years old. I ended up graduating with my degree with about $95,000 in student debt. And also with a new awareness that with each year, a lot of interest would accrue. I am an adjunct, which means that I'm part-time. If I teach 3 classes or more, I have to get health insurance, so most adjuncts teach 2 classes. 80% of my students are completely paying for school with student loans.
The idea is that you have to enter into debt in order to labor. And entering into debt in order to labor is the prerequisite of any system of indenture. Our students increasingly are asked to see their college degree as a bargain for which they've traded the wages of their future.
The amount that I have to pay back every month is beyond what I can afford. It's a really frustrating black hole to be a part of. And I'm here with, you know, so many other people who are just really drowning every month. Getting a master's degree or going to law school seems, you know, like such an overwhelming amount of money that I'd eventually have to pay that I just have just missed that from my future plans. And I know a ton of other people who have also done the same thing, which is a shame.
We're asking a considerable level of responsibility from 18-year-olds who are offered these sums of money to pursue their dream of a college education. I don't think we're in a position to blame those kinds of individuals for their choices when we don't ask for accountability from the lenders whose motives are predatory in nature. Student lending is the most lucrative profit area within the finance industry. There's something called slabs, which is student loan asset-backed securities, which is a market whereby student loans are securitized and bundled and sold off in much the same way as subprime mortgage loans were bundled and securitized in the lead up to the financial crash. That's an immensely lucrative market for private lenders like Sallie Mae in particular. If debtors default, that's the point at which the profits increase, because additional fees and penalties are piled on. That's the point at which the really lavish returns kick in.
I make about $800 a month, and if I were, if I paid attention to my student loans, I would be having to pay probably $400 a month in student loan payments. I just simply cannot do that.
Creditors have extraordinary extractive powers for collecting returns on the loans that involve garnishing of wages, garnishing of social security, disability benefits, all sorts of things. Almost uniquely, student debtors can't discharge their debts through bankruptcy. This generation is facing chronic underemployment for who knows, for decades to come. Their debt is unpayable.
National Lawyers Guild number. National Lawyers Guild number. Write it on your heart. Write it on your heart.
The response by law enforcement has been aggressive, increasingly militarized.
They're not concerned about legality. They're concerned about control, social control.
They see protesters as the enemy. They will increase charges, change the way they're doing business, bend the law, and say that that's acceptable because these are possible violent offenders and threats.
If you refuse to leave, you will be arrested and charged with disorderly conduct or other pertinent traffic infractions.
It's fair to say that protest has been criminalized in this country.
Just look at a bill that is passed that can detain you if you're not convicted but suspected to be a terrorist.
The government uses the fear of another terrorist attack to say we have to crack down on people who dissent, people who criticize the government, people who take to the streets and may often do so using a lot of rhetorical speech, which the Supreme Court has defended for decades. The vast majority of cases violate the Constitution, local laws, and the tradition of honoring First Amendment activity in this country. Local municipalities may make a decision to be very heavy-handed in how police treat protesters, knowing that they're violating the law, knowing that when lawsuits are filed afterwards, they will likely have to pay a hefty fine. It's being built into police departments' cost of doing business. A lot of the arrests involve agents provocateur, informants, people who the government solicit who may have criminal records themselves, to infiltrate activist movements, to spy on them, to gather information when there's no evidence that anything criminal is even afoot.
Millions of dollars are being pumped directly from the Department of Homeland Security into the New York Police Department. Whole swaths of Lower Manhattan are territory of Department of Homeland Security, their jurisdiction, and in the center of one of these is Zuccotti Park.
So we see unlawful arrests with no probable cause to arrest. Scores of people can be swept off the streets, detained on charges that are later dropped, and kept for 1 or 2 days or even longer.
The Department of Homeland Security directed local police forces to crack down on Occupy in this violent way.
Our system is run by fear. If you do not give up your every living right for us to control you, for us to pass bills, for terrorists not to attack you, then you will not survive.
A lot of the restrictions placed on the FBI have been lessened, once again under the guise of we need to pursue prospective terrorist threats. And literally the look of a demonstration and the police that are attendant there is really frightening. With the Occupy movement, those laws and the Constitution have been reinvigorated and retested because so many parks in this country have been occupied. And then we're finding out that many of those parks are owned by corporations.
If we acknowledge that our political system has been hijacked by corporate powers, then those people who've been elected have to protect the interests of their corporate owners. And so they coordinate a response. They consider Occupy to be verging on a domestic terrorist threat because it's a threat to their continued rule.
Is it the citizenry or is it big business? The increased cooperation between corporations and police departments, not only in guarding public places, but also engaging in surveillance and intelligence gathering, and even infiltrating activist groups, is really the way that we're headed in terms of how law enforcement operates in the United States.
I have a very interesting perspective being a police officer. As we all know, there's the fight and flight response. The police cannot have the flight response. They have to have the fight response. It takes tremendous amount of self-control and discipline to pull back. In the hiring process, they use a personality test labeled the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. They use it to see if your personality will fit with the job requirements. So the police department doesn't like to hire people that are too sensitive. So they hire the person who's a little harder, more insensitive. And that is where you have the University of California, Davis campus pepper spraying incident. But I want to know where the supervisor is there. Who's responsible that there was no, who gave him the order to do that, if anybody? The most common abuse of an order is overreaction, using more physical force than the situation calls for. The police officer can only use the smallest increment of physicality to affect the arrest. Once that arrest is effected, all physical action has to stop. Police do have to take orders to a certain degree, but they can decide whether or not it's an ethical order. And they do have the right to refuse an unethical order. I feel the role of the police is changing to more of an oppressor. The police are now becoming more of a symbol of protecting this corporate theft than protecting the people. When I went down to that protest at Wall Street, I had my sign, I was going to stand around with my sign, but when I saw all these people being arrested and sacrificing their freedom, and not only their freedom, but putting at risk their personal welfare for social justice, that inspiration just took over, you know, and they inspired me so much by their conviction that I made a very quick decision that I have to be arrested with them. The reason I wear my uniform at these demonstrations and meetings is because it represents a powerful symbol of challenging Wall Street, try to marginalize me, because they tried to marginalize the occupiers as people who mainstream America could not relate to. And I just resented that manipulation of the entire country to detach themselves from this movement because of that. So I said, hey, my uniform will go a long way in them not being able to marginalize us.
Ever since the beginning in Zuccotti, the media has been in a tenuous relationship with the police.
I was shocked at the way they handled the press here.
I think restricting press is a violation of human rights.
New York Post,
New York Times, all the major news publications, the NYPD's press office came to them individually inside the kitchen and said, you guys have to leave or you will be arrested. I told the journalists, like, why are you guys leaving? And they said, if I lose my NYPD press badge, I lose my job.
What did he take?
My press pass.
When you start quieting the press, you're on a downward path toward dictatorship.
These fucking goons.
The people of New York created the New York City General Assembly, and they spread a model to the entire country that was adopted. Okay, now the beautiful people of Oakland are spreading another model. It's infused with more militancy. It's infused with a little bit more open, black bloc, anarchist kind of ethos.
The radicals, the anarchists, the communists came out, and that's why it's different.
Even though there's billions of dollars, this should be a rich city, but it's not.
Oakland is a city where the people have always been promised that being nice to business was going to better our lives, that we'll have more jobs. You have some service jobs at like fast food places and Walmart that pay minimum wage. People can't live off of those things. They push this idea of economic development, the false premise that giving incentive to business will cause a raise in the standard of living of the people. There's a lot of talk about the violence that happens in Oakland. There aren't jobs that people can survive on, so people get involved in an underground economy, in an illegal economy. And the violence that happens in Oakland is because of this. Let's make these jobs pay more, and then you won't have the violence. That connection is not going to be made because that connection has to do with having a class analysis. The end product of a class analysis is that we need a different system. Their idea of getting jobs that pay enough is letting an internet company come here and have an $11 million tax rebate without even asking them to hire anybody from Oakland. The reality is that the answer to our problems is to force the jobs that are here to pay the people that live here a better wage. It's only going to happen through organized labor, organized work stoppages and strikes. You have to have a movement strong enough to do that. That answer is not going to come to you from a politician.
We are the ones. We'll see your fake, tear down your stake, go get your guns. Check it out now, we came to fight.
All over the world, people were inspired by what we're doing.
In Nigeria, they had Occupy Nigeria. They shut down the whole country for a week. They got this going on in London, in France. Finally, when I go around the world, people are saying, finally, y'all are doing something in the US. What's the best way to engage with life than to change the world around you? We need you to be involved.
Occupy Oakland started up, and I still wasn't clear on where this was gonna go, but I saw some of the things they were doing, some of the things they wanted to expand upon, and started seeing how that very process that I thought didn't look like what it should look like is what brought everybody there.
We're walking up to the port right now. I'm about to shut down the port. The street is entirely full as far as I can see.
Shut down ports all over the West Coast and cost millions of dollars. And thousands of people showed up for that.
Each of the critiques of Occupy come with a certain assumption as to what Occupy should and shouldn't be. And I think that Occupy is the birth of something fundamentally new.
The entire world is fed up with the huge disparity of wealth caused by the present system. This is a warning shot to the 1%. Their wealth only exists because the 99% creates it for them.
There's never gonna be another one in our lifetime that is more viable. First time we got to Oscar Grant Plaza, the police said this is an unlawful assembly as soon as we got there. So obviously it wasn't because any rules had been broken. Later on that day, everyone met and marched back.
Riot cops have surrounded this entire area, so we're just waiting for them to come up. There's about 1,000 people just standing outside, streets shut down.
If you refuse to move now, chemical agents will be used.
Don't touch the barricade.
We're on the same side. We're supposed to be on our side, guys. Why can't you guys see that and get together and be on our side? And if you're gonna stand on the other side, then hear me now. You're gonna lose.
They got their tear gas masks on, ready to gas the peaceful protesters.
They wanted a show of force. It was basically like war. They were shooting people who definitely were not threatening to them.
What happened? What happened?
You got hit.
He got shot. What's your name? What's your name? What's your name? Wake up. What's your name? What's your name? Shit. Medic!
The police were very unlucky that the person they decided to shoot was an Iraq War veteran. Once he's on the ground, you see a cop lob a flashbang grenade at his head. Police that didn't care whether they killed somebody. So did they want someone to die? If it wasn't caught on film, they would have said, oh, either it was just a mistake, sorry, or they would have said he was attacking people. That's the idea of the demonstrator, that for some reason people are just demonstrating because that's what they like to do. And, you know, they're not people that care about the world. And, well, this conflicts with their idea of the soldiers because they've been for 10 years saying, support our troops, support our troops. Here's our guys in uniform. They want people to support their endeavors to make money through bloodshed. Average, everyday people aren't the only ones watching the YouTube clips. It's other police officers and other police forces trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. It has become a testing ground to see what will happen. They want to figure out how to smash a movement. They're using Oakland to do it.
Because the same corporations that destroyed their lives, are profiting from destroying our lives.
I am Jason Washburn. I'm originally from San Diego, California. I served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps and did 3 tours of duty in Iraq. I was there basically from the invasion all the way up through 2006. My job was essentially to go on patrol every single day and look for Iraqis who wanted to fight and either capture or kill them. I had always kind of wanted to be in the military. You know, I had grown up with G.I. Joe and whatnot, and always thought the idea of serving in the military seemed heroic. During the third deployment, there didn't even seem to be a mission. It was more like drive around and wait to get blown up. Day after day, hitting IEDs in virtually the same places day after day, and watching my friends get injured and wounded and killed. Being a veteran in America today is usually to be unheard, an unspoken voice that, even if it is spoken, is usually brushed off or ignored. You see people driving around with the yellow ribbon on their car, support the troops, flying little American flags on their SUVs, And yet when it really comes to taking care of veterans when they get back from war, they don't actually get involved. They don't take care of the veterans. There have been more veterans that have died by suicide than have died in the current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that should blow everybody's mind. I know it does mine. It breaks my heart. I feel like being a part of the Occupy movement is bringing a voice to these veterans' cry for help.
My name is Joseph Carter.
My name is Joseph Carter.
I'm a two-time Iraq War veteran.
I'm a two-time Iraq War veteran.
And this is the only occupation.
And this is the only occupation
that I believe in.
I believe in.
For 10 years we have been engaged.
For 10 years we have been engaged.
In wars that have enriched the wealthiest 1%.
In wars that have enriched the wealthiest 1%.
As a member of the 99%.
As a member of the 99%.
I find this unacceptable.
I find this unacceptable.
And I call on all veterans.
And I call on all veterans.
Raise your voice and say.
Raise your voice and say.
I am a veteran and I am the 99%.
I am a veteran and I am 99%.
This is supposed to be, a country of the people, for the people, and by the people. Instead, people get elected into office and then just do whatever they want. What the occupation is trying to say is that they need to be held accountable for their actions. They are our elected officials, not our leaders. They're supposed to be doing the will of the people, not their own. The difference between the role I played as a Marine on the front lines in Iraq and myself now on the front lines of this occupation is that now I actually know who the enemy is. And it's not the people in Iraq. If another country were to invade the United States and kill many people in the population in the process, and everyone I knew lost people in their family, and we had tanks and troops patrolling our streets, I can pretty much guarantee I would be doing exactly the same thing that the Iraqis did. I would be the guy out there being the insurgent, trying to fight for the lives of my fellow Americans and my friends and family. I will stay a Marine. It's something that I'll carry with me forever. And that includes the things that I signed up originally to do, which were things like protect freedom, defend the Constitution against all enemies, and protect those who can't protect themselves.
It's the veterans!
As veterans!
Who signed up!
Who signed up!
To defend the Constitution!
To defend the Constitution!
I'm telling you!
I'm telling you!
To fight back!
To fight back!
That you should fight back!
That you should fight back!
Power to the people!
Power to the people!
After the war was ended, the protesters back there, including myself, realized that the whole Vietnam War was due to corporate America, and we wanted to go further and change the way we were governed back then. But we failed to do that because so much of mainstream America was very comfortable. Everybody had good pensions, everybody had jobs, everybody had health care. Now, mainstream America is greatly affected.
At one point in time, the United States was considered the quintessential middle-class society. We were the country that other citizens of other nations looked to for their understanding of what a broad-based consumer democracy looked like. And that's not as true as it used to be. And so we've seen a replacement of a sort of vibrant civic democracy with a much more money-dominated political life.
The Occupy movement is really about giving people a voice. People who have been disenfranchised, beaten down by the existing system, people who have lost their homes, people who have lost their jobs, people who, maybe they're working, but they're working minimum wage or less to get by. They don't have a voice in the current system.
I went to General Assembly the other night. I asked them to come over here and support me and occupy my house. It's not only me, it's other people that this is happening to. So I'm asking you guys, if possible, to help me to occupy my house to keep them from taking it from me.
If you go to any foreclosure court in this country, you'll see these lines of people and they're literally boiling with anger about what's happened to them. After a while, enough of that anger spills out into the population and it's gonna come out in protests like this sooner or later.
In the beginning, I was afraid to speak out. If we stay together and keep supporting each other, I think we'll be able to change whatever we put our minds to. People are tired. People are tired of big banks and government stealing everything from middle class or lower class people. We are the ones that make these cities and these states. The banks need to stop being greedy. Work with people like me. If we can do this all over the world, maybe we can stop the banks from doing this and taking people's homes. This is a nationwide issue, not just one person's issue. Stand up and fight for what you believe in, because if you don't do it for yourself, nobody's gonna do it for you.
Right now, I am outside of Zuccotti. I was leaving the spokes council meeting when this shit came down.
He told you to leave. No, he didn't. Now stop. I'm filming. Don't fuck. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to keep filming as I walk away.
Zuccotti Park was cleared of protesters earlier in a surprise sweep at 11. The secret drill to help police pull it off.
Plaza. There's reportedly 1,000 plus police officers on their way to raid the camp.
What is your fucking badge number?
What's your badge number?
I have a right to know your badge number. Tell me your badge number now.
These people were my family. They were my brothers, my sisters, and I loved them. And to see that everything that we built organically, everybody that I loved just get beaten, thrown in jail, it was just this crazy, crazy, crazy night. They had these barricades up around the park. They had these goons just guarding it, and I just didn't feel comfortable going back into there because it was a freaking crime scene. And you know, the crime was against us and nobody was doing anything about it.
You know, I carry a Constitution in my back pocket. That is my permit to access the First Amendment right to freedom of assembly. And I feel as though, you know, the days that we no longer have access to our own streets, those are sad days.
If it looks like a park, if it serves the function that most parks do, where people can congregate, have lunch, give a speech, talk out, then it is a park. We're seeing a lot of hastily drafted regulations aimed at shutting down what we thought were public parks, but that are being taken away from us because we have a fearful government who cannot tolerate too much free speech. One can't ignore the fact that We are becoming literally a police state with so much money spent on really militarizing domestic law enforcement and making our citizens the targets of that.
They are going to continue to crack down in a way that jeopardizes everyone, not just members of Occupy. I do feel that Occupy has a responsibility if they're going to touch this third rail of the center of power. They do have an obligation to pass legislation to protect freedom of speech and peaceful assembly, to mobilize votes, to organize.
What I want the movement to accomplish, I think, has already been accomplished, to build dialogue. That is the only thing that I think needed to happen through this occupation.
Bullshit. It's just complete bullshit to accept the idea that changing the discourse is any kind of real victory. It is a sedative to tell citizens that, changing the discourse is any kind of meaningful act. It's exactly what the powers that be want this organization to believe, that there's some kind of huge victory in getting some ridiculous meme into the social media. It's nonsense. We need laws to protect us. We need to repeal the Patriot Act. We need to, force disclosure of financial records. We need to pass legislation to separate money from politics, taking back the power of the electoral process.
So before I came to school today, I had coffee.
Mic check! Mr. President! Mr. President! Over 4,000 peaceful protesters! Over 4,000 peaceful protesters! Have been arrested! Have been arrested! While the bankers continue! While the bankers continue! To destroy the economy with impunity! To destroy the economy with impunity! We must stop the assault! We must stop the assault! On our First Amendment right! On our First Amendment right!
That's all right. Listen, I'm going to be talking about a whole range of things today, and I appreciate you guys making your point. Let me go ahead and make mine, all right? And I'll listen to you, you listen to me, all right?
I mean, no one's going to argue that Mitt Romney is the same as Barack Obama. They are clearly different, but both are roughly acceptable to the Wall Street companies that, I write about.
Previously, we lived in, at least nominally, a democracy. So that would mean that if you're a human being, you have an equal voice in the American political system. But now, corporations also have a voice in our political system, and they have a direct voice through money.
Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision that removed limits against corporations sending money into the hands of lobbyists who in turn pump money into ads supporting political candidates.
Bush made 2 appointments to the Supreme Court before he left, Roberts and Alito. And that was enough to cast the majority Supreme Court not just to the conservative side, but literally to the corporatist side. On January 21, 2010, the majority of the court decided that the laws banning corporate financing of elections are unconstitutional and that corporations are to be treated as persons under the First Amendment.
Citizens United swept away any limit on the role of money in American politics.
Lobbying was once a very marginal aspect of American politics, and it's grown to be a major industry.
The 2010 elections was the first in which we had this huge flood of corporate money come into congressional races. As a result, the Republicans stormed into the House of Representatives, gaining more than 80 new seats, gained several seats in the Senate to give them a minority lock on the filibuster in the Senate.
I'm here to tell you tonight that our new majority will be prepared to do things differently, to take a new approach that hasn't been tried in Washington before by either party.
John Boehner became Speaker of the House with the new Republican majority, and what he immediately did was issue advice to all these 80 new freshman Republicans coming into the House. Don't bring your local campaign staff. Instead, work with K Street and bring in these insider lobbyists that can now become your chief of staff. So literally, we saw an increase of 68 registered lobbyists leaving K Street, becoming chiefs of staff for the new freshman Republicans who just took over the House. This is the direct impact of the Citizens United decision.
If you go back and look at these debates about the financial deregulation, it was really the lobbyists for Wall Street who had the ear of members of Congress.
So far this year, we've kept our pledge by passing legislation to ease the regulatory burden, expand American energy production, repeal the job-crushing health care law, and many more.
On issue after issue, the financial industry had basically been rewriting the rules to let them do whatever they wanted.
You know, it used to be one man equals one vote. Now it's $1 equals one vote because money equals speech, according to our Supreme Court.
Congress doesn't work for us anymore. That's why you see this huge disconnect now between voters and our elected officials. They don't need to respond to us any longer. They're sort of wholly bought off by lobbyists. And that is why many people around the world call the United States government right now a corporatocracy.
If we are going to rein in corporate abuses, we've got to get a handle on their money in our politics.
Organization, the ability to have sustained mobilization over long periods of time, is essential to change the Washington ecosystem. It's not clear whether or not the protest politics that is so central to Occupy Wall Street will be able to make that transit over to a more organized presence in our political life. That's not at all to deny the influence that Occupy Wall Street has had, but it's to say that it's going to have to be a long-term proposition.
Happy New Year. What's your resolution? Revolution.
It's about time. I don't care about him. I don't care about none of these guys. They think they run something. They don't. They laugh at it. They laugh because my parents were foreclosed on. They laugh because I was homeless. They laugh because my sister can't afford school. I don't appreciate being laughed in my face about that. I'm sick and tired of it. As I watch the people that I've grown to love for the past 3 months, over 3 months, get beat to a pulp, pepper sprayed, and they laugh. They laugh. Fuck the police. If they don't want to be part of this, fuck them. How you doing? Fuck them all.
I don't know where it will go. No one knows where it will go. But there has been a shift, an opening of possibility that wasn't there before.
With the increased power that the Supreme Court has given corporations in this country, and with the increased collaboration between corporations, police, and government, it may seem that we're on a path of no return. But I think that Occupy provided a huge ray of hope to hundreds of thousands of people in this country, because it showed that we can take it to the streets, and people with their cell phones are going to capture this not only around the country, but around the globe.
A lot of traditionally mainstream news outlets started investigating the income disparity problem in America. You just wouldn't have seen that before Occupy.
Occupy Wall Street is a movement where we elevate ourselves, the people of the world, onto the negotiation table as equals in power. It's not a fight with the police, it's a fight with the 1%.
We could raise taxes on people. That's not the way. Corporations are people, my friend. We can raise taxes on, of course they are. Everything corporations earn ultimately goes to people. So, where do you think it goes? Whose pockets? Whose pockets?
I don't think the police and the government have been successful in squashing this movement. It will change, it will adapt, it may go through periods of quietude, but it will come back and it will endure. And I think that that is testament to the fact that you cannot keep Americans quiet.
From the depths, I call your mom for your prayers and dress so warm and faithful. Your hand reached inside, grab my palm. Love disabled, and for your mercy, and yeah, Just stay